Appeals for the Village of Webster this Monday, September 19th. We have one item on the agenda tonight, and that item is that the Village of Webster is currently proposing to install a cell tower on its property located at 1073 Webster Road. Tax ID is listed in there. The zoning board of the Village of Webster will meet to determine if the Village of Webster meets the guidelines for governmental immunity from zoning, specifically as it relates to this proposed installation of a cell tower on that current property. Now, the process we'll go through here is I'm going to ask for someone to present to you and tell you exactly what it is that's being asked to be done. Then I'm going to ask if there's anybody from the general audience who would like to speak for or against it. And the only thing I'll say here is we'll listen to anything anybody has to say, but what is germane to this process is the specific question of whether or not we are going to grant that governmental immunity from zoning. But as I said, we'll listen to anything. After that, we'll close that portion of the hearing, and we'll do is the board will have an open discussion. There are 9 or 10 points that we will go through that either qualify it or don't qualify it, and then we will render a decision at the end of that time. Did I miss anything, David?
You got it.
All right, it's pretty good, huh? All right. So, right now I'm going to ask if Jake would get up and tell us what it is the village would like to do, where they'd like to do it, and why they are doing it.
The village board is, I guess the village board is the ones that apply to zoning to, as you said, make the determination of whether or not the village zoning would be applicable to this action on this site. This is our water tank site up on Webster Road, and just north of where there's a steel pole barn there, just north of that is where the village is proposing to put a cell tower. There's 2 tanks. Yeah, and this up and down and backwards. There's 2 tanks up on the site. I'm going to smart here. 2 tanks up on the site. Now, the southernmost tank, smaller of the 2, Water County Water Authority has planned to take down. When we had the water department, it was used only part of the time, and it's basically the cost of maintenance is going to be more than the benefit you derive from it. So they're going to take this down. You can see here in the little dashes, there's cellular antennas on both the tanks. So when they take this down, the antennas are going to have to go somewhere. We have a consultant that we hired in regards to building the tower and certainly for his expertise in that whole cellular industry. He indicates that if that happens, or when that happens, the cell companies will be looking to put a bigger, like a short antenna, 25 or 30 foot antenna on top of this tank. This is shown here to scale. This is looking west. This is 195 foot tower, excuse me, that's proposed. His discussions with the cell companies, AT&T and T-Mobile would like these locations up at the top, and Verizon would like this location down here, which does leave opportunities for another couple carriers in this location, or in that elevation. One of the things we also like to look at with this a few years back, about 6 or 7 years ago, the village was investigating trying to use radio to communicate with our pump stations and send it down to a dialer at our sewage treatment plant. Something we didn't have the elevation. There's a short antenna on top of our garage over here. Something we didn't have the elevation to shoot to get all the way down to the sewage treatment plant. That's something we'd like to look at in one of these elevations here to so we can collect signals from the pump stations and get them back down to the plant for any, when a sewage pump station's not working or if electricity or has a problem, that's something we want to get down there fast for, and people want us to get down there fast for. So that's basically it. When you look at it, on the other side, I'm going to try to do this without dropping everything this time. This is the location, as I said, this shows Webster Road here. This is the existing pole barn building where we store some material, seasonal items. This is the shaded areas of suggested pad to the tower, and this is about probably 1/10 of the lot. I have it, a small paper I could put it in perspective, that I could pass around, I just did a sketch up of another thing that I sent around, but just as a matter of perspective, that's the green line. You can't write down these new copies very well, but the green line indicates about where the fenced-in area would be, and that's about where the pad would be. And this is that entire big green field that's up there north of the tanks.
Hey, Jake, the answer to the question is why the height and why the location?
Well, location, it's the cell companies kind of determine where works best within their existing network. The height, obviously, when you're sending signals, I'm learning things about cellular communications. There's azimuths, they call them, the angle that the signal's being received on. Verizon can be here because they shoot and miss the tanks. These other ones, the way that their next tower is, they have to shoot over the tank. That's why they ended up being on both the tanks in the first place. So Verizon, like I said, is able to keep here because they're existing network, and the other ones, they have an existing network they have to work within as well. So. And obviously, I think everybody's got the paper, the guidance document regarding the test, the 9 factors that are considered in regards to the whether or not a government agency is immune to its own zoning. It's a or other zoning, I guess, but in this case, we're looking for our own zoning.
So, in summary, the village wants to take down the south tank.
The water authority is taking down
The
the
water
south
authority
tank.
is gonna take down the south tank. We can't use that pad because the existing infrastructure that exists there, if they ever have to do anything.
Yes, yep.
And the request is to put up another cell tower just north of the existing north tank. Cell phone companies have requested 195 feet, and that's the request. The request also here is that we, the village board has asked us to examine whether or not we fit within the governmental immunity structure. And that's what this hearing is all about.
That is my understanding.
Thank you. All right, questions from folks here?
Wasn't there some discussion at the last meeting about the height being less than 195,
There was.
being 180 possibly?
What I understand the consultant said was that he would go back and ask that question.
So we don't have an answer.
Well, we don't have an answer, and I don't think that that's not what's being asked of this board, is what should be the height.
No, I'm just curious.
Okay.
One of the questions that the board asked.
He did say he would go back and ask, and that he might be able to get it down to 180, was what he said. But,
I think it's important for the people who are here.
okay.
That's a great point. One of the other questions too that I've had people ask is there's a tower, you gotta be careful, it's not a cell tower, but it looks just like one at the south end of the fireman's field. It's very close proximity, I guess, from where this is. That's the Monroe County Emergency Communications Tower. They don't mix, they don't put cell towers on those at all, so that wouldn't be a location that was available to anybody. And from my understanding with the cell, they're very particular about where, because obviously everything's, from what I understand, I guess it's not obvious, they have to, they're aiming over here, they have to hit the next tower, and they're aiming this way to hit the next tower to make their whole network work. It's up to me as you can, be great, so I have no idea how the rest of that works.
When the cell companies originally came in and put their cell antennas, or to propose putting cell antennas on the tanks, what they were doing is they had a map and they showed the blackout areas where there was little or no reception. So this particular area itself fills a gap in coverage and reception. That's why they're on the tanks right now.
Other questions, comments, or thoughts?
How high is the tallest water tower right now?
Jake?
It's 142 feet. Yeah, but they're also, keep in mind that the ground shows a change in elevation, the ground goes up where that is as well. So I don't know if he's got it on here, the true distance, top to top, but this is 142, but the ground's 20 foot higher. It's essentially 162 compared to the 195. I don't see where he has that measurement. You know, on here, they show that true distance between here and here. They did such a great job that nobody has any more.
No other questions up here?
I'm sorry, excuse me. Why did they say that the existing antennas aren't sufficient?
Well, the existing antennas are sufficient, but our conversations with Monroe County, they were on the tank when Monroe County took over, Monroe County Water Authority took over our water system.
So is it just to replace the ones that are going away with the tower or the one water tank moving? Or
That's important.
being on?
One of the important things, I guess it's not overly important to this function, but one of the items is also that the village derives about $80,000 a year, $80,000 a year of revenue. For put it in perspective, our tax revenue is about $600,000 a year. So it's a little more than, I guess it's close to almost a sixth of it. We do have spots here for additional antennas. We used to have 5 carriers on the tank, and then the cell companies keep marrying and getting divorced and switching and all sorts of stuff. I don't know who's who anymore, but one of the things we're looking at doing is getting those off of the tanks completely. They are, when we had the water department, it's obviously a good revenue source, and that revenue source is going to cease after December this year. We're discussing an extension based on how, the outcome of everything, to see if we get this built and we can extend it out a few months while this is, or 6 months or so while this is completed, so that the village can continue to enjoy that. But there are blessing and a curse. There's a lot of equipment that goes up there, and certainly makes the tank maintenance difficult maintaining the tanks because everything's all hanging over off to the side. This tank is a nightmare to get up. I've been up on this one you actually have to climb backwards, get up over, and I don't want to watch anybody even do that, so, and fixing those antennas, like I said, that obviously puts everything in place in the way of trying to maintain the tank and keep those nice looking as well, so.
I have a question too. Did they prospect any other feasible locations as far as the blackout area goes?
I think because these are existing, maybe Will might have better insight into this, because these are existing locations, they know that this works. The increased elevation is only gonna help things and give them a little more signal. I don't know, I had notes here, that it has to be, and I apologize if the consultant that knows about this industry wasn't able to make it. He was here last Thursday. But I have notes here. Does an eighth of a mile sound consistent with what you're regarding as far as where they've got to be? I understand it's an eighth of a mile. It's about 650 feet is where, so it's, it's not a huge area where they have to choose from. If they say this is a good spot for it, you maybe have a 650-foot radius, and somewhere in there is kind of where it has to go. To make, their network work and make everything continue. But I'm certainly not an expert on how to, keep that in mind.
Could probably move it 100 feet one way or the other without loss of signal. It's pretty much right at with signal loss. There is none where that is.
Okay.
If they move it over 100 feet, then there is loss of signal, I guess. But I know
Oh, really? Is it that close? I have to have my kid operate my smartphone for me, so I don't. And I've had, this too, I asked along, see if anybody wants to see it or show. This map that we had on the other side didn't show a real great perspective, and it's real hard to draw on this new EA toner thing, or that wax. But this shows just a portion of that big green lot, that grassy field that's over there. I mean, it's probably half again as big. If you put it in perspective, it'd come down to about here. If the whole field was shown, and this Jackson's back here, probably in this area. So, and that's kind of what's on that map there. I apologize for the drawing.
Where's the closest cell tower that would be similar in size and,
I don't know how, there's one of their shoots on Plank Road, I don't know the height of that. I'm trying to think where the other, are you familiar with where?
Yeah, I know the chute one.
Shoots, right?
Yeah, well, not that high, I know Xerox has a couple on their buildings, but there's nothing like that.
Some of it's dependent, and there's one up on Dublin Hill Road, I don't think it's very high because Dublin Hill Road's real high. You know, to get away, it's getting the elevation from what I understand, so this area is certainly higher than, I think there's one down on Phillips Road. I'm trying to think when we get calls, you know, where the cell phone shows up, there's, you know, 1075 Ridge Road, I think, I don't know if there's one at the town hall, is that a cell tower there? So there's one there. There's one down on Phillips Road, which I imagine has to be even higher yet because it's got to shoot up, you know, over the ridge and all that. So we're in a fortunate position of being, you know, on the south side of the ridge, on a higher portion of it.
Is this going to decrease your property values?
I'm not an expert in anything tonight. I'm certainly not an expert in that, but there's a rusty water tank a couple hundred feet away. And I'm assuming with the rusty water tank coming down and the new cell tower going up, they would at least equal out. I would assume that they'd go, I don't think it's gonna raise them, but I don't know as if it would have an impact beyond what that rusty water tank would have to the old rivet tank. So I can't speak to that, though. No, I always argue things are worth less.
Mark,
When you, and as long as we're into it, and I don't have any problem with this kind of a forum or session, just let us know, and I know who you are. Let us know who you are, Peter.
okay. Can you take it? I'm just going to move over a seat because part of the taping thing is now you'll hear my voice way too much on that tape. I just wanted to, I know that a lot of these questions we're talking about here are not really germane to why we're here tonight. So we're talking about exemption from village zoning. So I was just going to ask you if it would be okay if I just asked you a few questions about that part of it. The first thing is, I noticed number one is the nature and scope of the instrumentality seeking the immunity. And I note that the village is seeking to make the, 59 Dunning Avenue, sorry. It's unclear why the village is actually seeking the immunity from their own zoning. I'm wondering what the compelling interest is for the village to be exempt. And I'm wondering why the village can't just proceed with a typical site plan review on this project. I actually was doing research on this, so there's some court cases like Dunn versus the town of Warwick and Amelia versus Luther. The local government is presumed to be subject to its own regulations, and I think for a project of this scope, I think the village should be subject to its own regulations. The second thing is the encroaching government's legislative authority. It's not really relevant because they certainly can do it. The third thing is the kind of function or land involved. Just wanted to note the construction of a cell tower is within the purview of the village government, but it does so on a parcel of open space that's leased by the Monroe County Water Authority. And I'm just wondering if the appropriate permissions have been given by MCWH to construct the tower. The fourth thing is the effect local land use has on regulation on the enterprise concerned. I noticed the zoning for this parcel is R1 13.6. The use of the use being proposed is not allowed for this zone without a special use permit. And so that being the case, I really think there should be maximum public input into the site plan. That would entail going through a normal site plan review. We talked about the alternate locations a little bit, but just so the board knows that there's, and Don probably knows this better than I do, there's at least one court decision that was critical in Caston versus Town of Gardner Town Board, where the court annulled the town's approval of the tower and its immunity to local zoning after holding that the balancing of public interest test required the town to consider alternative locations. And I know Jake said that there are specific coverages here, but I haven't seen a report. Maybe there is one, but I'm wondering where's the written documentation of that? Is there such thing? The sixth thing is the impact upon legitimate local interests. The interest in relocating the cell facilities should be balanced with a renegotiation of the contract with MCWA. I mean, the contract is not written in stone. And I'm just wondering if there's been an investigation about whether or not the little water tower, because it is iconic and actually has the Village of Webster on it, could actually be used for anything in terms of these, in terms of the cell performance? Could it be elevated on the top? I don't know. I realize it's a pain, but you and I have actually had discussions about this, how critical, well, maybe critical is wrong, but how important it is for a community to have some kind of identification up there. And if that little tower comes down, nothing identifies this as the Village of Webster anymore on those water towers, right? Because it's not on the big ones, right? So I'm wondering if the village could talk to the MCWA about maybe retaining the small tower for some kind of cell tower usage. I don't know. I'm just wondering if those discussions have been done, and they are germane to this issue of immunity. The alternative methods of providing the proposed improvement, I think that's, again, has this been studied? For instance, could the village install cell technology on roofs, as was done recently on a building on Main Street? I think it's on the corner of North Avenue and East and West Main. The eighth one is the extent of the public interest to be served. And obviously, the village wants to retain the revenue for the towers. I'd like to see the revenue retained myself. But however, the board has made it clear in a recent decision that discontinued the composting at the sewer treatment plant that the concerns and welfare of neighboring properties trumps concerns over revenue. Under that precedent, the public interest looks best served when first considering the possible aesthetic, health, and welfare of the residents adjacent to the improvement, which is exactly what they did for the composting. So I think the criteria should be used for the cell antenna. And ninth thing is intergovernment participation in the project development process. And I wonder if the village has actually worked with Monroe County Water Authority, because it seems like they're an integral partner in this project. I know you mentioned you're trying to get an extension, so I'm guessing you are, but it goes back to, is there a way to find a way to maybe look at that contract and kind of make it a little bit different so that we can utilize some existing infrastructure that's there, perhaps? If it sounds like I'm against this, I just want you to know I'm not. I understand that, but what I am kind of questioning is whether or not the village shouldn't go through a normal site plan review. I'm not sure exactly what the rush is. If you can negotiate 6 months with Monroe County Water Authority, why not 9? And my question is, why not give the public the ability to come in here and at the planning board level to give their comments? I think it's a big enough project, it may deserve that. So, that's it.
Fair enough. A couple of questions for David. Special use permit, does that play into this at all?
This would be, yes, this would be considered special permit use.
But that's granted by the village board, not by this board.
That's granted by the planning board.
Yeah.
So they would have primary jurisdiction over it, although if there's any variances, use variance, area variance, we come back here for that.
Written documentations on the coverage, Dave?
I do not have those. I could, obviously, with each cell.
I know I've seen it when they
with
put it up.
With each application that comes in for a new antenna, there's discussions, there's coverages, there's usually a little block up in the corner, and we talk about the angles that they're transmitting and receiving, and you know, where they are, on the other side, where they are on the tank, their elevation, and the exact location. Tanks are empty because they're upside down. And the exact location on the tank and where they're going to have to be to continue the coverage. Peter had a great question in regards to this tank. I would speculate, I don't have any data on it, but I would speculate that the maintenance and upkeep on an old tank would cost far more than it would and far less advantageous to have than a new tower would be. And also, these tanks are least stable when they're empty. And I think that's one of the interests. They're kind of designed to hold weight. That's 500,000 gallons of water, which is, somebody does the math quick, 8 pounds a gallon. It's a lot.
1 million pounds.
Like you said. So there's a lot of weight there that they're holding up, and that actually adds to the stability of the tower itself. So that's one of the things. And this question in regards to number 8, the public interest served. Obviously, the financial interest as village residents, as a taxpayer, is pretty important interest to me, but I think also I've got a couple things here that the public interest doesn't just apply to what the public provides or what the government provides. You know, if there's everybody, I would guess almost everybody here probably has a cell phone and enjoys the service and the convenience and what's become a necessity. I don't know honestly how we functioned years ago without them. I'm sure everybody doesn't have them. Those are the ones that are still good planners. But a lot of people do. I know I can't make it to a trip to the grocery store without a couple of calls to see what I forgot to get. So that's something that's everybody's using, and it's become I don't want to say it's a necessity, but it's a convenience that's enjoyed by most, if not everybody, so. So I think that portion of public interest is certainly something that's should be looked at.
Hold on one second, Mr. Walters. Just a final question. Why this as opposed to, and I think that is a relevant question, why this as opposed to going through the normal process which would require 2 public hearings? Although the village board would have to have a public hearing for this, they'd have to do it in a public meeting, right?
Oh, yeah, anything they do is gonna, on
Okay.
this is gonna have to be a public meeting, and there may actually be permissive referendum depending on how the transfers
Yeah.
back and forth between the water authority.
But no public hearing, though.
Well, that's, one of the things is as we're looking at this project and considering the project, we have to, a lot of it's dependent on a whole lot of different aspects. I guess what this board does this evening, depending on which way that goes, it could be a planning board and a zoning board action that has to be undertaken. We also have to still, as we said, we're talking to the water authority about the disposition of that parcel, the way the lease language reads, whether or not we can have an extension. If we can't have an extension, time is of the essence, because it's frankly costing our village taxpayers money then after December. So we'd like to get that, ball rolling on that, like that, a time frame. Part of their consideration is, what's the time frame? We don't have a great answer to that yet. Also, when we're looking at what that lease parcel is, obviously we're gonna have to take that portion of that parcel back out. I don't think it would make any sense to me, and I'm sure Don thinks it's better to own property, lease it to somebody else, and put an asset back on that property that somebody else already has control over. Seems to me it'd be best if we could take that, carve that piece back out, and then have that and maintain control of that. At times, that's part of the discussions that we'd have to have, or finalize, I guess, with the water authority. We had meetings in August with the cell companies, with the water authority, and discuss, some of these possibilities, just as, people that are the stakeholders and what's involved here, just to see, frankly, because I'm not an expert in this, and I wanted to talk to those different companies and see what it would entail. Our original thought, like a lot of people suggested, is put it back right here. It seemed like a great spot, everything was already run over, or half of it was already run over there. Then the water authority, part of the benefit of those discussions, was the water authority saying, no, if this one's down and this one's still standing, if they ever go to replace this, they want to put one right here and a new tank here. But, that makes sense. It's a good spot, other infrastructure's already run there, piping and all those things, and it's way everything's already kind of set up, so that makes sense, which is why that, right here is where that little building is. It's actually probably close to this area right here. So, that's why this area was looked at.
Okay.
So you're saying there's always gonna be at least one water tower there? When the little one comes, the small one comes down, they wanna replace the big one, they're gonna put another water tower where the small one is today?
That's my understanding. They could certainly do something with the tank over on State Road. They could build another water tower somewhere else. They would provide them the pressure that they need to supply this area. So my understanding right now, this is required, this is necessary for pressures. Just hydraulically, we need this there to be able to get pressure in everybody's home. So, I'm saying they couldn't do something else with another tank elsewhere, or, they could do State Road tank if they did something there, or, in another location, so.
Okay.
I want to state, as Peter did, that this should go to a full planning and zoning. I believe this is what you could call a self-imposed hardship. Jake said they have meetings in August. For the previous 2.5 years, they have done nothing towards this project. They knew about this project 3 minutes after the election 3 years ago, because it was stated at the election time that Webster Water would go away, and the contracts they negotiated eliminated the use of these towers as cell towers. So this is a self-imposed hardship by the village. And to wait 2.5 years before, or more, before they bring it to the boards is unforgivable. All right? Jake says they've been meeting, there's a lot of things that haven't come up which go to their own hardship. The tax map, as was stated, states that this is one lot. Ownership is unclear. In 40 years, does the whole place convert to the county, or 37 years now? Or does the side green lot stay with the village of Webster and the rest go to the county? We don't know. It's not spelled out too clearly in the contract. These are things, this has to be solved before anything is built there, is the ownership of the land we're putting it at. The lease is up in 37 years. Are we going to be leasing the land back from the county that we're leasing them for $1 to build this? We don't know at this point. These questions have been asked to the village board and there has been no answer back yet. We haven't had a definite cost on what the cell tower is going to cost. Jake says it's money coming in for the village, but $70,000 a year, what I was told at the last village board meeting, is about what we get at the current time. It does go up a little bit with every contract or every year as it's renewed, but which is basically an inflation adjustment, I believe. But we don't know how much we're going to bring in, or we don't even know how much it's going to cost. I think the village, in trying to get you to declare this action, is stepping out way ahead of their facts and their figures. We don't know yet, or haven't been told anyway, who pays the cost of moving all this equipment off these water towers to the new cell tower. How does the contract read? With each one of these cell carriers, because we're making them move, are we, the village, going to bear the cost? We're already got at $70,000 a year, at least at $200,000 for the tower, at least 3 years before the village makes any money off of this. If it's $300,000 for the tower, the other number we're very in range ahead, now we're talking more than 4 years without any moving costs or any expenses. The cost of maintenance of the tower hasn't been discussed. This type of tower is traditionally a low maintenance. However, eventually everything needs to be fixed. So my question is, and statement is, that the village has not done their due diligence to bring this to you. We don't know what the costs are. We have no idea what the costs are. So what is the payback? Is it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? It's income to the village, but if it's going to take 10 years before we break even, what is the point of doing this? And this, I think, under some of the points Peter read, is part of the objective, is they have to show you, or should show you, a need for this action. And until they have some firm numbers, they haven't showed you the need for your action tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can answer some of those. I obviously don't think they're germane to the question before the board this evening, but some of the discussions, or some of the questions that Mr. Walter had, is the cost of the tower is about $125,000, it's $70,000 or $80,000. It's a little over probably 1 year and 3 quarters before the payback would be realized. Obviously, we don't have firm numbers yet because we're waiting to spend some of your money on different approvals before we start the geotech and before we start a lot of the engineering and the survey work there, which are all not huge amounts in the grand scheme of things, $5,000 or $10,000, but it's a lot to me. So we don't want to spend that money until we understand a little bit further in if we're going to be able to do the project or where we're at.
I understand that the numbers we have heard so far was $100,000 to $300,000 for the tower.
And that's when we were getting, I did about a year ago or more, seek estimates from a tower construction company, just so we had budget figures and things to work with. Obviously, there's the benefit of hiring a consultant. The consultant's fees are about $14,000, being an expert in the field. I went and saw one tower construction company, discussed it with them, so I had an idea. It was a local company, so I had some idea what we were working with. Frankly, I don't think new vehicles should, a new truck should cost $40,000, but that's what they cost. So I have nothing to base what a tower is. I even have less than something to base that on. So that's why I'm trying to ask the experts to give at least a budget number. Frankly, I'm happy that I get higher numbers, and then we know, if we're working under that, that's, it's even better yet. If we looked at it at that point, it was feasible, and we get better numbers than that, which we have gotten, I think it's even better. But I just remind everybody, it says in the guidance document for immunity from zoning, it says where a local government is not bound itself to the requirements of its zoning regulations, the municipal governing board must protect the public interest by examining the 9 factors as applied to the current zoning. It must determine whether it is immune from the requirements of the zoning regulation and whether the zoning permit is necessary. It goes on to even where a municipal governing board has declared an action immune from zoning, it may still wish to comply with the requirements of zoning where practical and with public notice and hearing requirements. So I think that, the question that the board have sent me here for was whether or not the village, this action will be immune from zoning. And there, I think, great questions in regards to hydrant towers and all the particulars, but that's not really, I don't think, why we're here. It's the examination of those 9 factors, which some of those particulars do go into that. But that's, I guess, the board to decide.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna go over each one of the line items on that one at a time.
I'll answer number 5 when you get to it,
Do you want to go?
on your 9 items.
Thank you.
No, okay.
All right, yes, sir.
Eric Reynolds. So I want to particularly, well, first of all, I'm not necessarily against the project. What I am worried about is that the rush to get it in place. As Mr. Walter said, there's been 3 years to investigate this, and we're coming down to the last 6 months, and it seems like a very large push at the last minute. And so that being said, I'm concerned about number 8, the extent of the public interest to be served by the improvement. Because this is essentially a rushed project, we have to actually ask for extensions with Monroe County Water Authority, which that contract was signed 3 years ago. Why are we rushing to do it all of a sudden and not going through the normal process where the people's interest can be best supported and best looked at? That's my problem. And I think that's the underlying issue that most people have, is that this is rushed. And it seems like, and this is not germane to the project at all, but it seems like that is how the board and the mayor processes things now. Make it an emergency and push it through. And I beg of you not to push this through without properly vetting it through the public. Thank you.
If I may, just as a response that, frankly, I don't know if the request, if this meeting were held, or if this project was further ahead, two and a half years ago or 2.5 weeks from now, I think we'd still end up being in the same exact position, requesting the same exact thing. It's an option that's available to the village. It's something that's I believe, and Don can speak to this, there's case law and things locally right here in Monroe County that examine this type of question. Obviously, it's not the first time it came up. There's a whole handbook on it, so somebody else thought of it before us. And as like I said, I don't think if it 2.5 years ago if we came up with this, or 2 weeks from now, I think we'd still be in the same exact thing, asking for the same exact thing. It's not a function of timing, it's a function of how do we, logistics, how do we accomplish this?
Perception.
Oh, absolutely, and
So
perception.
anything you created for.
Perception is reality.
Go on, that's all.
That's right, and it's, it depends on what people are thinking about, and, yeah, but I don't disagree, we should have done this sooner.
Fair enough.
But-
I heard this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Eric,
He was pointing at me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You couldn't have told I'm behind you.
That's all right, go ahead.
Don White, I'm the attorney for the village board. Eric mentioned that, go through the normal process. Well, as Jake said, this is part of the normal process. If governments weren't allowed to seek limited immunity from its own zoning ordinance, we wouldn't be here, but obviously, it's allowed. The Court of Appeals case, the highest court in New York, it's been done for years. This is not anything new. School districts are absolutely immune from zoning ordinances. Schools can build wherever they want in any district. They don't have to go to planning boards, zoning boards, nothing. This is limited immunity, not absolute like a school district has. So, there is more public participation in this kind of process than if a school district was going to do something. So this is part of the normal process, and I agree with Jake. The board would have asked the zoning board for the same question, whether this was, today or 2 years ago. Look, let's face it, if you're a property owner and you don't have to seek a height variance, wouldn't you try to not have to go through the variance process if you didn't have to? That seems logical to me. I'd do that. Get to what Mr. Walter said. We know who owns the land. The Village of Webster owns the land. It's subject to a 40-year lease with the Monroe County Water Authority. At the end of the lease, the Village of Webster still owns the land. There's nothing in that lease that says everything goes to the Monroe County Water Authority. After 40 years, the Water Authority has a decision to make. They either renew the lease or they can buy everything from the Village of Webster. Probably just going to renew the lease, but it's still the village's land. It's always the village land, and that's what the lease says. So there's no confusion about that, and that's, frankly,
In particular, thank you for pointing that out, because in listening to this, I thought we were leasing the land from Monroe County.
No, it's the other way around.
That went with the water authority, so thank you for
It's
that.
the other way around. It's the village's land, and they're
Okay.
leasing it from the village. And in every discussion, the Water Authority knows about the cell tower. They've never said, oh, you can't put it on this part of the leased property. They're not using this leased area. So that's not going to be an issue with taking that piece out of the lease. But it's not really germane to the issue in front of this board anyhow. All the financial things that Mr. Walter brought up really aren't germane. The cost of maintenance of a cell tower, that's got nothing to do with whether you should grant immunities or not.
Thank you very much, sir.
I'd like to dispute that last statement a little bit, that what I brought up is not germane. I believe from what the points that were read, one is in the best interest of the public. Cost and dollars that we spend is in the interest of the public, I believe. Maybe not if you're a lawyer and have that kind of income, but in my tax bracket, it is an interest to the public, which is the point, which is one of the
Fair
points.
enough on the point.
Mr.
Go ahead. Eric,
Yes.
you had something?
So it may have been that we would go through this process that we're going through now, but it would have been much less rushed, and there would have been more of an opportunity for the public to have input into it and to know what's going on. The fact that we're at the 11th hour now, and we will lose money after December if we can't get an extension signed with the Monroe County Water Authority. And the fact is, we've leased them that property for 40 years, and there's a contract on that. We can't just go in there and build on property that we've leased to somebody else without adjusting the contract. So, there is more to this story than Mr.
The only
White
thing I'd
said.
like to counter on that with is the point that if if this had come before this board in June of 2015, it would have still taken a 10-day notice or 15, and then we would have had 30 days. If they asked this board for a rendering, and we failed to render in 30 or 60 days, David? 62 days, all right. It becomes okay at that point anyhow. So are we rushed? They may be rushed. I have my 30 and my 62 days, and I'm still gonna have my 30 or 62 days, whether they gave it to me in June of 2015 or tonight. They may have a sense of urgency. That doesn't play into this board. Go ahead, thank you very much.
And in fact, that's just to summarize quickly what I said. I think that's why it'd be good if we could identify the compelling interest that makes it so that the village needs to have immunity from its own zoning.
Fair enough.
That's it.
That's what we're here to try and do. Thank you. Anyone else? Come on, we'll get people to talk to. All right, very good. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was able to be heard and got their points out. Now what I'm going to do is close that public portion of the meeting and ask David to lead us through the 9 questions and points, or 10 questions, 9. Thank you.
Okay, I think most of you have the pamphlet in front of you with the excerpt from the County of Monroe versus City of Rochester case. That is New York State Court of Appeals decision. It lays out the test that we are required to use, which does consist of the nine particular points. Because the way that case developed is different than what is being proposed here, not all of these elements, not all of these 9 are going to be relevant. That case involved the County of Monroe trying to impose a use, if you will, from the city's point of view. They came into the city, said, we're going to do this here, and we can do this, and we don't need your approval from your zoning board because we're the government. So the first element is the nature and scope of the instrumentality seeking immunity, and the second is the encroaching government's legislative grant. There is no encroachment here, and the number 1, the nature and scope, we're all one. There is no difference. The kind of function or land use involved. Is this a public use, a governmental use, or is this more something that the village is proposing to do more in line with its mercantile goals? Number 4, what would the effect of the local land use regulation be on the enterprise being considered? Combine that with number 5, are there alternative locations where in less restrictive zoning districts? Those 3, to my mind, kind of go together. If this is a governmental use, under the case law for cell towers, the governmental use really comes down to the governmental interest in favor of co-location, with plenty of case law on that.
I read that today.
That ties in with whether alternative locations in other districts would work just as well. Well, from what we're told, anyway, there are no...
We've had multiple carriers come before this board seeking to put antennas on the towers, and they've all said exactly the same thing. I'm not an engineer. I believe them. They keep coming back and saying that is the ideal location. Go ahead, Will.
I have 5 applications of the major carriers that are on the tank right now. 3 out of the 5 provided a propagation study showing that area is detrimental to the coverage. So they actually have the map and the criteria and the justification. And the others, basically in the meeting minutes, said, this is exactly what we need. They said it, but they didn't provide the propagation study. The fact of the matter is that the antennas exist basically show that that is a required spot by the antenna company, by virtue of the fact that they're on the tank itself.
No.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Now, what would imposition of the zoning rules, what impact would that have on the enterprise?
Are they asking us to predict what we would do if it came before the board?
I think so. I think
No,
so.
I think it's just identifying what variances would be required, what approvals would be needed from the planning board or the zoning board. Not how you'd ultimately rule, you don't have to, obviously you don't have to say that.
Well,
I was gonna resist that.
No, what the effect would be. The effect would be you'd have to go to the zoning board for ABC. I don't know what all the variances are.
Okay.
What's wrong with it?
I disagree. This case that they're, where they.
2 lawyers disagreeing?
Imagine
Come
that.
on!
Imagine that. We're gonna arm wrestle after. No, but the way the case of the County of Monroe case came down, it was, the city said, you can't build that aspect of your airport on our piece of land. And if you are subject to our zoning, you can't do that. And that's going to have an impact on the functioning of the Monroe County Airport. I think here I'm really struggling with what the downside to the enterprise would be if it has to go through the zoning. If we make them go through, if we make the village board go through the planning board and probably this board, I'm struggling with where the impact on the project is. Because at that point, it becomes the legitimate goals that were impacted by whether or not this aspect of the airport was going to be included within the city limits. Okay. Number 7, alternative methods. Are there any alternatives?
I don't know of any alternatives, and I go back to the studies that have been presented to us and say this is the ideal location.
You might want to consider, leaving them on the other tank, but, I don't know. The extent of the public interest to be served, again, that seems to me less of a, not so much the mercantile function, but as the functioning function. The facts on the ground, that would be changed if we impose the zoning requirements on the village board.
Be any? Well, we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. And then intergovernmental participation. That came down to whether is the city going to have to talk to the county and vice versa. And was there going to be some give and take between the two entities there?
Sounds to me like the 2 primary entities have been talking, have they not?
Certainly sounds like it to me.
Okay. By the way, do you object or disagree? At the end of this process, we have gone through and we've identified those things. Taking into consideration the totality of the impact or the encroachment that the government has on its land use regulations, I guess we're looking for a standard motion.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't a question. That was more like a statement. Jake, go ahead.
I know it's closed, I don't know if it's too late. I just, for a point of clarification, I think that this case of cited in Monroe County versus the City of Rochester, the important thing that comes out of that is the 9 factors that are considered.
Right, this is what the courts came out with, were these 9
But
factors.
The 9 factors are what's important. It's a completely different matter when there's 2 municipalities, and to use the way the court approached it and the way it was handled, when you're talking about one municipality entering another municipality and seeking immunity from zoning, and apply that to when a municipality is seeking immunity from its own zoning.
Interesting
They're
point.
completely different
No,
things.
I get it.
The 9 factors are all that I think you need to focus on from Monroe County and City of Rochester case. That just provided a list. All the big write-up in the summary just provided a list of 9 things to look at, not any direction as to how to look at them.
No, exactly. And the other point out of that was one governmental entity and another governmental entity. Here you have the same governmental entity requesting to be exempt from its own regulations. All right. Here's what you can do. You can make a motion to grant the immunity from its own, and David, I'm not going to worry about how I say it. I'm going to grant the village exemption from its own zoning laws, or you can make a motion that says, no, I think we ought to send this back. We will vote on either motion. Either motion needs a vote of 3 in the affirmative to pass. Being that we have a board of 5, we'll get there. And I can't make the motion when I'm sitting there.
I make a motion that we send it back and just say that we would like the village to go through the normal process of zoning procedure.
Okay, fair enough. What we have is we have a motion on the table to send it back. We'll ask.
Just a motion to not,
You're like denying a
Yeah,
variance.
not to give approval.
Correct.
Right, not send anything back.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table. All those in favor?
Or if you give a second?
Oh, excuse me, right, second. I got excited there for a minute. Do we have a second to that motion to send it back or ask it to go through the...
I'll second that.
Okay, we do have a second on the table by Mr. Fantuzzo. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those in favor? Aye. We have 2 ayes. Opposed? Aye? Aye. Okay. So that motion fails. Do we have a motion on the table to grant the governmental immunity?
I'll make a motion that we grant governmental immunity to the Village of Webster board for this particular matter only.
For this matter and this particular piece of property. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
We have it seconded. All right. Do we have those all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay. The motion is passed, 3-2. Very good. Thank you all for coming in. Appreciate your participation in the process. Will?
How about
Yes.
this month?
We have one item. One item.
Shed.
Nothing exciting, sorry.
Okay. We do have a meeting next month. I'll make sure they're aware. All right. Adjourn? Yes. Do you have any questions? Anything you want to ask David to run through before we close? No, now you can ask.
Did they adjourn yet? Did they adjourn?
do a motion?
Okay, I'm still waiting for them.
Thank you.
Second. Seconded, all in favor? Aye.